The Babylon Project was our last best hope for Scott. A self-contained podcast, 1 hour long, located on the internet. A place of fun and discussion for Babylon 5 fans everywhere. A shining beacon in cyberspace, all alone in the night. It was the dawn of the 20th anniversary of Babylon 5, the year the Great War to free Bab 5 came upon us all. This is the story of the last of the Babylon podcasts. The year is 2014. The name of the place is the Babylon Project Podcast. The host of the Babylon Project podcast, Jim Arrowwood and Raul Wybera.
Hi, this is Raul, and I am here with Jim Arrowwood, and you are listening to the Babylon Project podcast. How are you doing tonight, Jim?
I'm doing real well, and I'm ready for this show. Been looking forward to this for quite some time.
It's been a while since we've recorded for The Gathering.
Yep.
But less time than we had between the live showing of The Gathering and when Straczynski was able to actually start the show. Yeah. That was 9 months. I don't think our audience will be waiting quite so long.
No.
So how have you been lately?
Oh, real good. Been healthy, happy, and getting to work every day and all that good stuff. So, yeah, no complaints.
I know on my side, it has been busy, but I guess the way of putting it's been busy in a good way. Tonight's show is about Midnight on the Firing Line. This was the Season 1, Episode 1 opener, and it, in a lot of ways, reset the show and got us started into the main series after the pilot. I think the best way of going about this, Jim, is if you could go ahead and give us your summary.
Very well.
Archive. Access. Initiated.
The show opens with events on a Centauri agricultural colony called Ragesh 3. A jump point opens and the colony comes under attack. The colony is destroyed before a message can be sent identifying the attackers. Ivanova meets Garibaldi and asks where Commander Sinclair is. She is informed that he is probably on the observation deck. Ivanova finds him and tells him that there is a problem. Meanwhile, Garibaldi and Londo exchange words as Londo's assistant Veer enters and tells Londo that the colony has fallen under a massive attack, and no one knows who the attackers are. Londo talks with Sinclair as G'Kar and Delenn enter the conference room. Both offer their sympathies, but Londo is angry and presses G'Kar, who claims that he knows nothing. Sinclair suggests that everyone contact their governments and they will meet later. Ivanova gets word that an Earth-registered vessel is under attack. Licensed telepath Talia Winters reports to Ivanova, who ignores her because she is busy. Garibaldi takes a fighter out to learn what happened to the ship that was in distress. Sinclair watches the news in his office and Ivanova enters. They discuss the Ragesh 3 situation. Sinclair discounts that the Minbari would have been the attackers. They also discuss the presidential election to take place back on Earth. Veer enters Londo's quarters with a video of the attack. Londo recognizes that one of the fighters is Narn, and he immediately heads out to find G'Kar. Garibaldi finds no survivors on the ship, and he recovers the ship's black box. The damage to the ship shows that it did indeed fall under attack. Londo finds and confronts G'Kar. Londo wants to know the reason for the attack. G'Kar admits knowing about it, and they struggle briefly before station security breaks them up. G'Kar tells Londo that it is now the Narn's time and that he should sleep lightly. Londo and Sinclair meet in Londo's quarters. Londo apologizes for his behavior, and he tells Sinclair that G'Kar and he will once again fight each other in the future. Londo explains how his nephew was on the colony and fears him dead. Sinclair explains that if Londo gives in to his anger, war will be the result. Londo promises that there will be war if his nephew is dead. Ivanova meets Garibaldi while he is dining. A group called the Raiders is responsible for the attacks. Talia enters, and Ivanova leaves in a hurry. Sinclair goes to visit Kosh in his quarters. He notices that Kosh is not in his encounter suit. Sinclair asks what the Vorlon's position is on the situation and gets no answer. Then he asks if Kosh will attend the council meeting. He says he will. He further says that both races, the Centauri and the Narn, are dying peoples and they should be allowed to pass. Ivanova finds Garibaldi at her station in the command center. Garibaldi is investigating the attacks on the transport ships by the Raiders. Veer and Londo visit in Londo's quarters. Veer tells him that he needs to attend the emergency session. Londo has been informed that the Centauri government will not risk a confrontation because the colony is too far. Londo doesn't want it to get out that the Centauri government's position is to do absolutely nothing about the attack, in hopes that perhaps other members of the council might help swing the Centauri into action. Talia enters a lift with Garibaldi. She asks him if he knows what she might have done to offend Ivanova. He tells her that she can be found in the casino and suggests that he visit with her there. Garibaldi then suggests that he and Talia get together later so he can show her his second favorite thing in the universe. Sinclair spends some time alone in the garden. When G'Kar enters, they talk, and G'Kar tells him that it is the Narn intention to finally wipe out the Centauri while they are weak. Sinclair tells G'Kar that the sneak attack makes the Narn appear as cowards. Garibaldi catches up with Sinclair in a corridor. Garibaldi has worked out how the Raiders are managing to find and attack ships. A senator and Sinclair meet on the communications network. Sinclair is ordered to delay the council meeting until after the election so that the EarthGov isn't involved. Earth must remain neutral. Ivanova tries to enter the office, but Sinclair makes sure she is not seen by the senator. After the senator rings off, Ivanova tells him that Garibaldi is ready to take a flight of fighters out to intercept the Raiders on their next attack. Sinclair tells Ivanova to have Garibaldi stand down and that he will replace him. Sinclair further tells Ivanova that she will chair the council meeting and that she is to vote for sanctions against the Narn. Sinclair leaves the station while Ivanova calls the council meeting to order. She starts to say that the purpose for the meeting is to vote on sanctions. G'Kar interrupts and explains that the Ragesh colony was a Narn colony before the Centauri attacked them. Delenn explains that there will be an unending cycle of war if the Narn continue. Meanwhile, Sinclair and his party arrive in the sector where he thinks the Raiders will strike. He sees that the transport is in the sector and that there are Raiders surrounding the ship. Back in the council meeting, G'Kar displays a live broadcast from Ragesh 3. The speaker on the broadcast is Karn Malari, Londo's nephew. He claims that there have been conflicts between the Centauri colonists and that they asked for the intervention from the Narn government of their own free will. Londo claims that his nephew's statement was made under duress and that it is a lie. G'Kar asks why he wants the council to take action against the Narn that his own government feels is inappropriate. G'Kar then moves that the charges be dismissed and calls for a vote. Sinclair calls for the surrender of the Raiders, and they answer with fire but are quickly neutralized and run. The Raiders head for a transport. Back on the station, Londo assembles a weapon and heads for G'Kar's quarters. On the way, he encounters Talia, who reads his strong emotions and intentions and contacts Garibaldi. Garibaldi confronts Londo in the corridor and stops him from carrying out his intentions. G'Kar enters Sinclair's office. Sinclair shows G'Kar that the raiders are being led by the Narn, and that they have found data indicating that the Ragesh 3 colony was forced to ally with the Narn under duress. Sinclair tells him that the Narn are to withdraw from Ragesh, or the evidence will be brought to the council. Talia finds Ivanova in the casino. They visit, and Ivanova explains why she was treating Talia so badly. It wasn't personal, but it was because of what Talia represents. Ivanova tells the story of what happened to her mother. Garibaldi finds Delenn and shares his second favorite thing in the universe with her. Sinclair learns that Santiago is elected president.
Initiating plot analysis.
Thank you, Jim. That was another excellent review. So it looked like there were a few changes between The Gathering and this episode.
Yes, there were. We got some quite a few changes, some new characters and some new looks for some characters.
Very much so. So first off, who came back?
Okay, we have Michael O'Hare as Commander Jeffrey Sinclair. Jerry Doyle returned as Michael Garibaldi. Mira Furlan came back as Delenn. Peter Jurassic as Londo Mollari, and Andreas Katsoulas as G'Kar. He returned.
And about those characters, well, as you said, they definitely had some revisions. Londo's hair, for starters, was much improved, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But the general appearance didn't change that much. His costume seemed a little more developed and definitely more elaborate, I thought.
I was thinking the same thing about the Earth Force people, too. There was more insignia and more indications of rank and things on their uniforms also.
Very true. In particular, I think the thing that stood out most was that big brown leather stripe or black leather stripe, depending on which uniform that you had on the front.
Yeah.
And they had the infamous comlink now stuck to their hands.
Yes. And it was down below the jacket line, so it could be seen.
Correct. I think the other thing where the Earth Alliance appearance changed, one of the things I didn't like in the Gathering was the firearm, their PPGs. They looked like a mini surfboard with a mixer handle on the bottom. And now the PPG actually looks like a weapon.
Yes.
Delenn was a huge change.
Okay, I've got to make a confession here. I have always had a crush on this lady. So
you and just about every other Babylon 5 geek out there.
Yeah, they really, really did a nice job of redoing her, taking away a lot of the prosthetics that they added, and making her actually appear female.
The ones that were covering her face, hiding her face.
Right. So apparently they had abandoned that idea of making the Minbari androgynous.
Thank God.
Yes.
Yeah, and her costuming, just all the flowing silks and satins, and that sort of became a trademark of hers.
Yes.
Oh, and the other thing, the bone crest. Her bone crest, it looks much more organic, in my opinion. It didn't look... There was no doubt that it was part of her, not that it was a headpiece.
Right, right.
And that'll become really obvious once we see the male Minbari.
Oh, yes. The males they have quite a bit more there. But that's for another day. We had some new characters, too.
Yep. Oh, one more. Hey, Jim, one more character that was changed a bit. G'Kar.
Oh, yes.
G'Kar was also changed. He was much less angular. I think in my notes the way I described it was manly ruggedness as far as his costuming was concerned.
Yeah.
He's still a bit vile as far as the character's concerned, but that's how he was intended to start. But he's not as foppish.
Right. Yeah, but he was just as irritating, if not more so, than he was in The Gathering.
Actually, I think that, if I can stay with that phrase, manly ruggedness, made that irritating nature even more effective.
Oh,
Kind of shows you just how much impact costuming and how they do the makeup and the prosthetics can really impact how a character comes across.
Oh, yeah.
And you said there were some new characters?
Yeah, we had some new characters. We replaced Tamara with Claudia Christian as...
Yay, Joe!
Yes, as Susan Ivanova. And we brought on Andrea Thompson, playing Talia Winters as the telepath, and Stephen Flounder First as Veer Koto. And I noticed you added the flounder to our notes. You want to explain that one if you really need to?
For those of you who are 20, 22 years old and watching Babylon 5 for the first time and do not have any history of classic movies at all, Stephen First's great call to fame, so to speak, for many, many years was his role as Flounder on Animal House, which is one of the great coming-of-college age movies of all time.
And so that about takes care of our new characters.
And there were no guest stars this show. It was really...
Yeah. It was a character establishing show for sure.
I mean, we did have sort of the quote walk-in with the senator, providing Sinclair his instructions, but beyond that...
Yeah, and his character wasn't even named. He was just simply the senator.
But I do have to note something about the senator. Well, first of all, and I'm going to assume it's because of the change in the election and everything else that goes on with Earth, but we do get Senator Yoshi?
Yes.
I believe will be the regular. You notice the big screen he was talking to him on during the Babcom conversation.
Uh-huh.
That was a 16 by 9 screen, right?
I believe you're right.
16 by 9 screen in 1994.
Right, and as we talked on our diner hijacking, Straczynski was anticipating that in the future.
Indeed. In fact, on the DVDs, he shot the actual live action in 16 by 9.
Right.
So there was just some problems with the compositing, so when you get special effects plus characters, it kind of loses something. The other thing that's worth noting about those conversations, just as a very quick aside, and then we get back on track, the other thing is that is actually a live conversation that was going on.
Ah.
The actor playing the senator was in a different room behind a desk with a camera on him, and that conversation took place essentially in real time.
Oh.
So that's why if it seems like the conversation was a little more organic than you might think, they actually were acting with each other.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yep. And one other thing just to note on that, there was a lot of flat panel displays. Those were also pretty rare in 94.
Yeah, that's true.
Now we don't think about flat panels that much today. Well, how many people still have an analog television, for example? Well, we have one downstairs that my son plays with the old classic Nintendo NES, and we've got the old DVD on it, but everything else is digital high def.
Yeah,
my last
27-inch screen died about 2 years ago.
Ours is a Sony Trinitron. That's not going to happen. They last forever.
Yeah,
but
good equipment.
But having flat panel displays in 1994 was a big deal.
Yes.
Let's get ourselves back on track. That was a little bit of an aside there.
Mm-hmm. You
had mentioned lots of introductory material. or perhaps a better way of putting it might be more reintroductory material.
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely true. It was really expanded from the pilot, I thought.
Yeah, we got a lot of new stuff here and a lot of new things to explore that weren't brought out during the pilot. One of the things is the Narn Centauri War. We had some background on that and the apparent coming up conflict that'll take place later on. We learned a little more about Psychor.
Yes.
Not near as much as we're going to get, that's for sure, but about their rules and their regulations. In the council meeting, we were introduced to the League of Non-Aligned Worlds.
Somewhat cursory, but yeah, it was there. We saw the Pakmara, which will eventually get named. I mean, none of them were actually named there.
Right.
And I think that was an early form, an early design for the Drazi that we saw sitting there, though they were a little more pointy-headed.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest were pretty much nondescript, but the League was finally there.
Right. We got some character backstory, a little bit, not too much, and backstories on some of the races that were involved. And then a glimpse into EarthGov politics.
And what was interesting about that is it's almost treated as a side issue or background issue.
Yes.
But it actually is a driver for at least the first 4 seasons.
Yes, a huge
little less so. The scope gets galactic in the 5th season, but in those first 4 seasons, it's a main driver of the series.
Yes.
And it's just sort of a side footnote. Well, gee, we've got an election going on at home.
Yeah, and at the end of the story, too, it was very plain that the election did not go the way that the crew on Babylon 5 hoped it would.
At least not Ivanova.
Right.
Yeah, how did she describe that with Santiago? He has no chin, and the vice president has several.
Yes.
This combination does not bode well.
Now, the vice president, that would be Clark, right?
That would be Clark.
Okay. Who figures quite prominently later on down the road.
We see just a bit more of President Clark than we see of Sauron in Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's in the background, totally evil, but he's important.
Yep.
And
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go.
No. Well, I was going to say that we get a little more of a glimpse into the Vorlon race and what an enigma they are and how mysterious.
And that's actually a word that's used to describe the enigma throughout the first several seasons.
Yes. We just don't learn a whole lot about them. And through the whole series, we don't really get a lot of in-depth information till very much later on, and then they're gone. They're always a mystery.
And what's funny about that, as mysterious as they are, Straczynski largely answers the questions about them that the show raises.
Yeah.
He manages to give us the essential answers without messing up the enigma, as you phrased it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really describes a lot of the way that the milieu was expanded and established in this episode. They did a lot in an hour. It was fast.
Oh yeah, and one of the things that we find out about Kosh is the way he answers questions or poses things, and
the Koshisms.
Yes, as you put them, Koshisms. They are alone. They are a dying people. We should let them pass. Meaning the
talking about the Centauri, and Sinclair asks, "Who, the Narn or the Centauri?"
Right, and Kosh just simply says yes. Most of Kosh's, a lot of Kosh's answers are one word answers, yes or no.
he gives those one-word answers.
Right.
And get used to it because, like Winston Churchill said, he's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma.
Yeah. Kosh almost seems to just not have time to deal with stuff like that. He just, he'll give you his answer, and if it's not acceptable, well, tough. He's got other things to worry about.
Or at least he's definitely on his own agenda. That actually, I don't know if it's so much a matter of time or a matter of agenda, because sort of connected with that, I mean, does he really even need that alternative atmosphere? Or is he just trying to keep people away?
I know that's part of the question. Why?
Yes.
He's just very simply just no one really knows.
Except maybe, like I said, at the end of the gathering, it seems Delenn is a little more aware of the Vorlons than the rest of the races.
Well,
even that we don't know.
She did give Sinclair that information chip that supposedly had everything that the Minbari know about them. But
though I wouldn't presume to trust the completeness of that, frankly.
Okay.
There were a couple of other things that we got about Kosh, though, in this one, too. He still has the glow that we saw.
Yes.
He was behind that panel. His encounter suit was open at the top. And when he made that dash into the encounter suit, there was that rush of wings. And that rush of wing sound that we heard.
Yes.
And it was amazingly fast, so he had to go in from the top. So, can Vorlons fly? Do they have wings? What is it?
Stay tuned. We're going to find that out.
Stay tuned. That was one of the big mysteries. I remember online, everyone was speculating the way people would speculate about Lost or Fringe. They were speculating about the flight of the Vorlons.
Yes.
I think we might as well just take your list in reverse since we've talked about Vorlons. The Earthguff politics was another thing that you mentioned had expanded a lot.
Well, maybe not a lot, but we did get a look into how the Earthgov does want to control things happening on Babylon 5.
The Senate Oversight Committee.
Yeah, the senator basically told Sinclair, you are not to vote for sanctions right now. We're in the middle of an election. And so Sinclair said, fine and dandy. And then he took off and left the station, took over the mission from Garibaldi and gave Ivanova other orders.
Which is interesting because it kind of implies that the leadership of Babylon 5, even though it's run by the military, it's actually a political appointment.
Yes.
And we see this through at least the first couple of seasons because, as we mentioned before, Senator Yoshi, his direction comes from the Senate rather than the military.
Right.
So that becomes an issue later.
Yes, most definitely. Well, and you could imagine that the place would be a diplomatic, with its diplomatic nature, you could definitely see that a government would want to be in charge of it. However, at the same time, allowing the military to run because of the organizational nature of the military.
Right. In fact, actually, that almost makes it more questionable. And this kind of connects back to the original one of the questions I had in the gathering. Why was a mere military commander assigned to this post? But why was it even someone military and not some ambassador or some diplomat assigned to the post? We'll get answers to this eventually, but
yes,
it's still just an interesting question. And of course, we've already discussed the Santiago Crane election and the issue of chins. But we get a little bit of history on Earth, too. There's the terrorist nuking of San Diego. And my memory serves correctly, and if I'm wrong, maybe one of our listeners will send in a voicemail or an email on this. But the nuking of San Diego, I believe, was something of a personal dig, inside joke by Straczynski, who had at one time been in San Diego.
Oh.
And we also see the destruction of the first Mars colony mentioned. So, it seems like there's been problems with the Mars colony almost from day one.
Oh, yeah. Well, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yep. Character and race backstories you had mentioned.
As far as Sinclair's concerned, we learn that his family have been fighter pilots since the Battle of Britain, and he considers the Minbari to be honorable.
Right. And, that history of flying might help explain a little bit why he seems so quick to dash off in a Star Fury, but that is, and I'll discuss that a little later, and I'll discuss that ongoing, is something that I have an issue with. There really is an actual legitimate story-related answer to that, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Ivanova, we don't have a lot of weight to get some background into her character. Obviously, from the name, she's Russian.
Mm-hmm.
She's very literally described as new to the command structure, which really keeps the story continuity.
Right.
I think most important, she hates telepaths and the Psi Corps.
Right. She has very good reasons for.
She's got very, very good reasons. Her mother was a very, very low-level telepath, and this gets us some of the background history into the Psi Corps, too.
Yes.
She was not found by the testing. If you're found to be a telepath, you have 3 options. You can join the Corps, you can go to prison, or you can be put on these sleeper drugs to suppress your ability.
Yes.
And they found her mother in her mid-30s, I believe, and she was on the sleepers for 15 years. And the way Susan describes her is a little bit of her mom died each day until she finally committed suicide.
And Ivanova, she treated Talia badly, but later on in the show, of course, it's not because of who Talia is, it's because of what she represents, with the black gloves and the Psi Corps symbol and those kind of things. However, the funny thing is from Talia, we don't get any idea of really how dominant Psi Corps is.
Yes, in fact, from Talia, we get an image of the Psi Corps that they're benevolent, that they're there to help telepaths, that they're there to train and teach telepaths, and that they're to protect the normal non-telepaths from the telepaths.
Right. And I think that is probably their propaganda line coming through.
Yeah, but we very much get 2 contrasting views of the Psi Corps. Mm-hmm. One benign, one definitely sinister, and one of the questions is going to be, which is true? And as you'd like to say, stay tuned.
Yes.
Now, we've already discussed one of the items that you mentioned, and that was the League of Non-Aligned Worlds and the Advisory Council. Mm-hmm. So I don't know we need to rehash that, but the first item you mentioned, the Narn Centauri War, and that is a good thing to save for the last, because that is really the core of this story. And one of the things I personally liked is with that attack on Ragesh 3.
Right.
This story jumps immediately into the series, what really is the primary story arc, even though this episode is largely a standalone episode.
Okay.
It starts off the Narn Centauri conflict. We learn that the Narn were conquered by the Centauri and under their rule for about 100 years, that they won their freedom from the Centauri about 100 years ago, and largely their planet had been totally ravaged by the Centauri. The forests were destroyed. The people were enslaved. Mass executions, torture. I mean, it was just, the Centauri weren't very nice conquerors.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then along with that, it seems that the Centauri kind of overextended themselves in this
Yes.
effort, and now the Narn see their opportunity to strike back.
And that Narn-Centauri conflict is at the heart of a lot of what drives the series.
Yes.
Even though the real actors, and I don't mean television actors, I mean actors in the movers and shakers of events,
Mm-hmm.
even though the main actors are completely external to that Narn-Centauri war, they still intersect with it, and it becomes the element, that Narn-Centauri conflict becomes the element that drives much of the show.
Well, and of course, these two races have been at odds for so long that it's probably like the Hatfields and McCoys. It's just become something that's going to be.
I think at some point further down in the series, it's largely said that one of the races will destroy the other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way it will end. And that also gets back to your comment from Kosh about they are a dying people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Kosh makes comments along those lines further along in the series as well.
Yep.
And there's an irony here.
Okay.
In that mutual destruction, the two races, the two peoples dying, there's a very literal component to this, because the Centauri know how they will die. They have a vision at some point in their life, in their youth, that shows their death, right?
Yes.
That's what Londo explains to Sinclair.
Right.
Londo knows he's going to die in 20 years as he and Jakar choke the life out of each other.
Right.
Basically, in episode 1 of the series, Straczynski has told us the end of the story. I think there's a reflection of the Centauri people and the Narn people in that sort of mutual death.
Well, but the thing of it is as you and I both know,
there's more to it than meets the eye.
There's a whole lot more to it there that we're going to get to way down the road. So.
Yes. But this is the way Straczynski likes to play with your mind.
Yeah.
But you're right. And he's gone online to say, it's the journey. Mm-hmm. It's doesn't matter whether he's told you what happened. It's the journey, how you get there, and just because you see something doesn't mean you've seen it.
Right.
As in, don't get your expectations up, because he is going to throw you a few surprises.
Oh, more than a few. Yeah, appearances on Babylon 5 are most definitely deceiving.
Yep, and I got to throw a little side note in, because this was one of the things I had in mind. They look human, but their physiology and DNA are completely different. I loved Londo's lines. So I was wrong. Cut my wrists.
And yeah. you don't have any main arteries in your wrist.
Exactly.
So we were talking about the Psi-Corps. Maybe get back to that briefly.
Where do you want to go there?
Well, some of the things that telepaths can and cannot do, for instance, they cannot always block strong emotions, which came into this show very, very strongly, and actually saved Jakar from getting hurt badly. Or
worse, yes. When Talia ran into Londo.
Yes.
That actually becomes a device used at other points in the series as well.
It does.
But yeah, strong emotions, strong thoughts aren't always able to be blocked. We found out in the gathering that there is a practical purpose behind the gloves, because direct skin contact is a conduit for that telepathic connection.
Oh yeah, it would go deeper in that case. I really like the way that Garibaldi staved off the attack.
That was class.
He handled that so well.
He went outside the book, but of course, let's face it, if he went in the book, it would be a diplomatic incident that
Yes.
probably would have gotten both him and Londo a whole lot.
Yeah.
Do you think he really would have shot him?
Yes, I believe he was angry enough to.
Probably, but like you said, the paperwork.
Yeah. Well, and then Garibaldi says, I'm going to come and inspect your quarters in an hour. I better not find any weapons.
Well, no one admitted to having weapons, and let's face it, most of the others probably do have something tucked away as well. We knew they're gone now, but Delenn did have those rings. Londo knew he had a weapon.
Yeah.
Garibaldi knew he had a weapon. The fact that Talia reported it put something on the record, so Garibaldi has to at least check it out.
Yeah, that's a question I have though. You know, Garibaldi said, I better not find any weapons in your quarters. However, later on, there's weapons everywhere. I mean, the Narn soldiers with the katana blades. I mean, for crying out loud.
Well, Londo with the swords as well. I think he's talking about firearms, probably in this case.
Yeah. You don't think was that a slug thrower that that Londo had?
No, because when Talia saw what was in Londo's mind, we saw the plasma blasts, plasma bolts shooting out.
Okay.
And you notice, the weapons in general on Babylon 5, not necessarily, quote, energy weapons as lasers going zap-zing a la Star Wars, but PPG is what the weapons are called.
Right.
Phase plasma guns.
Right.
And it's a bolt of superheated plasma. Let's face it, you're in a pressurized tin can in deep space that's 5 miles long and spinning. You probably don't want to put many holes in the hull.
No, definitely not.
Okay, Jim, was there anything else on Garibaldi or Psychor that you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so.
I think one other important thing in this episode that needs to be addressed is the physics. In particular, the ships. I loved the fact that we have full Newtonian physics in Babylon 5. What that means is Newton's laws apply. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. An object in motion tends to stay in motion.
Correct.
Ships are flying sideways. Ships are flying backwards, upside down. You notice on the Star Furies, there's thrusters pointing forward, thrusters pointing backwards, maneuvering thrusters pointing off in basically all directions.
Yes.
In that fight with the Raider ships, there's flipping over, flipping around backwards, still flying backwards as they shoot. That, in science fiction as a whole, has been for a very long time one of my biggest beefs.
Yeah.
They're not planes in space. Now, the Raider ships, they did fly a little more plane-like. But you look at the design, and Straczynski even points this out. Those Raider ships are designed for atmospheric flight. He also points out, you notice they're not nearly as maneuverable as a Star Fury either.
Right.
But Star Furies are made for deep space, and they're made for space combat. In fact, the pilots don't sit in a Star Fury.
No, they're actually standing, leaning against a couch of some sort.
An acceleration couch, yeah.
Right.
And that's so they can better accommodate the G-forces. So I really love where he's gone with the technology. Just one aside, those suits, those space suits, were really isolating and very, very hot.
Yeah.
Those suits were actually liquid cooled.
Oh, really?
Really. They would get too hot inside those things, so they had to cool it.
Ah.
I think one of the things we probably want to do in wrapping up the show, because this was an intense, very dense episode, there were some definite lighthearted moments that I would really love to close us with. The biggie is Spoo. We find out about Spoo.
Yeah.
Sort of. At least we find out about it as a food. That it is a food. But do we ever really find out what it is in the show?
You know, thinking down the road, I don't think so. As far as I get with Spoo, is it looks like yogurt, and I want nothing to do with it.
Well, and this is one of the another one of those running gags, and it's one of the series' long running gags. Let's see. There's a few. Well, first of all, Spoo is oops spelled backwards.
Okay.
Let me find it here. Straczynski has written extensively on the internet about Spoo.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, he describes what does Spoo taste like. Well, first of all, understand Spoo is supposed to be the one dish that is universally loved by all species and all biologies.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, in the same breath, when asked what does Spoo taste like, his answer is meat jello, served chilled.
Yeah. Oh, I don't even want to think about it.
His comment here it is. This is Straczynski's own words, and there's a lot that he's written about it. I'm just going to read two. Spoo is /r, in parentheses, the plural of spoo is spoo. Small, white, pasty, mealy critters, rather worm-like, and generally regarded as the ugliest animal in the known galaxy by just about every sentient species capable of starflight, with the possible exception of the Pakmara, who would simply recommend a more rigorous program of exercise. They are also generally considered the most delicious food in all of known space, regardless of the individual's biology, almost regardless of species, except for the Pakmara, who like the flavor, but generally won't say so simply to be contrary. Spoo are raised on ranches on worlds with a damp, moist, somewhat chilly climate so that their skin can acquire the right shade of paleness. Spoo travel in herds, if moving a total of 6 inches in any given direction in the course of a year can actually be considered moving. They stay in herds ostensibly for mutual protection, but the reality is that if they weren't propped up against one another, most of them would simply fall down. They do not howl, bark, moo, purr, yap, squeak, or speak. Mainly they sigh. Herds of sighing Spoo can reportedly induce unparalleled bouts of depression, which is why most Spoo ranchers wear earmuffs, even when it's only mildly cold, damp, wet, and dreary outside. If there is any life-or-death struggle for dominance within the Spoo herd, it has not yet been detected by modern science. Some background on Spoo. This, like I said, this is outside of the series, of course.
Okay, so we have runny, yogurt-like, meat
cut
flavored,
into cubes.
Cold. I don't want it. No, thank you.
And he knows they're served into cubes. And Straczynski says that's so that they bear as little resemblance as possible to the animal from which they have just been sliced. And he also notes that Spoo are the only creature of which the Interstellar Animal Rights Protection League says simply, kill him.
Oh, boy.
Okay, another light note thing. One of the things, and believe it or not, it's my wife who noticed this one. And it sort of becomes a bit of a running gag that carries on throughout the season for a while. Did you notice Garibaldi and Talia in the elevator?
Oh, yeah.
Pay attention to where his eyes... He's got this fascination with watching her tush in the elevator, and this kind of continues on.
Yeah. Garibaldi's a red-blooded EarthGov American boy, I guess.
And I think you mentioned a story or a bit of a prank. I know the Babylon 5 cast were notorious for pranks.
Oh, gosh, I'll bet.
And you had mentioned a prank related to this.
Yeah, I read this this afternoon in show prep. There's a scene where Garibaldi is standing on an elevator, a tube, I guess they would call it. Talia gets on the tube with him. And then, of course, he checks her out and invites her to see his second favorite thing in the entire universe. And
we finally get an answer to that, too, later.
Oh, yes. And the lift closes. Well, apparently, in one of the scenes that they shot, one of the takes that they shot, the lift door opens, Talia's walking up to the doors, the doors open, and Garibaldi's standing there with his trousers down around his ankles.
gosh.
I and I could just about imagine where where Talia went with that. They probably, I'm guessing they probably had to shut the scene down for the day and wait another day to film that.
I wish that would have gotten included on the outtakes of the DVDs. That would have been hilarious to see.
Oh gosh, yes.
Oh my. So yeah, they're known for their having fun in this series. Oh gosh, and you know what though, we still haven't seen all the cast of the show.
No, we've got a few to come yet.
We still got a few to come. That's another thing that I've liked about it. Anything else particular that you liked about this episode?
Well, as we just talked about, I really like the way Garibaldi's dry sense of humor was established in this.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, he's always got something to say, and usually it can be a backhanded remark. He'll get serious from time to time and talk to somebody directly, but most of the time he would just as soon end his exchanges with a little bit of a joke of some kind or some flippant remark.
And I think on my side, the other thing to add as far as I like, very much Ivanova. That was just an absolute perfect casting and a perfect piece of character that they got with her.
Well,
that Russian pessimism.
But the thing of it is, in this episode, Ivanova came across kind of more like a messenger, running up and saying, "Okay, well, this is happening."
That is very much true.
Yeah.
But we got the first taste of her one-line quips.
Oh yeah. I'll tell you what, a mere tip of the iceberg.
Yes, a mere tip. They're going to go in great directions with that character.
And that's one of the reasons I really enjoy watching this show is mostly because of her.
That, I think, she helped pull me into this show initially too.
Yeah.
She had a big part of that.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, do we have anything else to add tonight?
I think we've talked this one pretty well. We looked at some of the aspects. I would be interested to find out though what our listeners think.
Yep. At the end of the show, keep your ears open. You will get the contact information. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us at the Babylon Project Podcast at gmail.com. You can send us voicemail or email, whichever you prefer there. Jim, on Twitter, where could we find you?
Myself, I am Jim Arrowwood 2, all one word, at Jim Arrowwood 2. I'm on Facebook under my regular name, and don't forget we also have our own Twitter account,
which is?
It is at the Babylon Project Podcast.
All right, and you can find me on Twitter at RYTechGeek. I'm also on Facebook. Just look me up there. Well, Jim, I think we're at a point then where we can say goodbye for tonight. No boom today.
Always a boom tomorrow.
Good night, folks.
Now, good night now.
Podcast terminated. Thank you for listening to the Babylon Project Podcast. You can email Raul and Jim at the Babylon Project Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at the Babylon Project Podcast. On the internet, we are at babylonprojectpodcast.wordpress.com. To subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on iTunes, or you can subscribe to the RSS feed on the webpage.